frog slowly. You're a frog in a pot. What will you do when the water gets hot? Will you jump out or will you get cooked? Listen to the show and you will be hooked.
Welcome to Boil the Frog Slowly, a radio program that answers the question, are politics hazardous to your health? We go where mainstream media stops. Co-hosted by Sebastian Sanzota, a marathon runner, a vegetarian, a former healthcare professional with 5 years of military experience in the U.S. Navy, including 2 tours in the Persian Gulf, primarily working with advanced airborne early warning radar aircraft. Sebastian is experiencing firsthand the ill effects of EMFs. He is passionate to share his medical background, experience, and research in an effort to educate and save others from boiling in this hot health war soup. And co-hosted by me, Pat Rouleau, author of Speak Up and Stay Alive, the Patient Advocate Hospital Survival Guide, and host-producer of the nationally syndicated radio show, Speak Up and Stay Alive Patient Safety Radio, heard on 220 radio and cable television stations throughout the country. The books and archive shows are available at speakupandstayalive.com. I too have been slowly and unknowingly boiled by hidden EMF hazards and have jumped out of the pot to tell all. You can listen to all previous and current Boil the Frog programs at boilthefrogradio.com, at iHeartRadio, and on our very own internet radio station, speakuptalkradio.com. I encourage you to share this program with as many people as you possibly can, week after week, as we gig out some of the leading issues we face today to help you understand, function, and ultimately survive in today's toxic environment proliferated by big money. Thank you for joining us as we jump out of the pot. All right, Sebastian, are you ready for today?
Yes, today's one of the best.
It is. What started as our viewing the 3-minute video by Dr. Martin Blank announcing the International EMF Scientist Appeal to the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the UN member states, requesting that they adopt more productive exposure guidelines for electromagnetic fields and wireless technology, quickly initiated an email request to Dr. Blank asking him to interview for our radio shows, and he kindly agreed. Now, just to bring folks up to speed, this appeal was initially signed by 190 scientists from 39 nations, and these scientists have collectively published over 2,000 peer-reviewed papers on the biological or health effects of non-ionizing radiation, part of the EMF spectrum. That includes extremely low frequency fields used for electricity or RF radio frequencies used for wireless communications. And so that is our topic today with the esteemed Dr. Martin Blank, who has had over 30 years of experience conducting EMF research at Columbia University Department of Physiology and Cellular Biophysics, and is a past president of the International Bioelectromagnetic Society. He was also one of the authors of the Bioinitiative Report, and his most recent book is a must-read, Overpowered: The Dangers of Electromagnetic Radiation and What You Can Do About It. So it is with our great pleasure, Dr. Martin Blank, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
All righty. We might have maybe set the stage by asking you to explain the major health crisis we are facing due to increasing levels of environmental pollution from the ever-expanding EMF sources.
Well, I said before Edison, the amount of radiation in our environment was there was very little in it, and the fact of the matter is that there was virtually nothing below the level of the infrared. It was all basically from the sun, and a little bit that came from lightning storms on Earth that came around the Earth through the ionosphere, which connects all the atmosphere, all the air above us. Now, the thing is that since then, Edison brought in power lines, and they go at 60 hertz. In other words, we use 60 cycles per second to transmit that power. And now it's been going to higher and higher frequencies because one can use these higher frequencies in much the same way. The technology is a little different, but you use the same kind of information that you pack in, and you pack in much more information as you get the higher frequency. So they've been using more and more of this for transmitting of radio and television and internet, and it just keeps on going. And we now have the environment that's just full of all of this radiation. I call it radiation. It's different from ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation everyone knows about. This is the stuff that that comes from radioactivity. It's particles that come off, alpha particles, beta and gamma rays. These are very, very destructive when they come off from things like the atomic bomb, when you get those kinds of transformations in it. And the thing is that the radiation is nevertheless active. Even power line radiation, which, as I mentioned earlier, the 60 cycles per second, even that causes problems. In fact, that was the first one that was identified in a large way. People had always found something that from the radiation. The early workers on radar during World War II were reporting all kinds of symptoms, and people realized that there were problems associated with exposure to radar. And somebody even discovered that there was something called a microwave click, that when this radiation was on, something happened in their ears, they could hear. But the thing is that it was found that there were all kinds of problems that one could get from this. And the literature started to build up. And most of the research that was done on this thing was actually done in Russia and in the Russian literature. So very little attention was paid to it until a paper in 1979 when two scientists here, Wertheimer and Leeper, published a paper showing that there was a correlation between childhood leukemia and exposure to the power lines. In other words, just the 60-cycle stuff that normally gives us the power to run our electricity and electrical appliances, that caused an increase in leukemia. Now, this was pretty hard to take because everyone had taken all this radiation. I call it radiation. This is low-frequency radiation, and I'm using this in the sense that it's used in our field. But the fact is, it's not nearly as powerful as the radiation we used to, these alpha, and beta, and gamma rays. That's a different kind of radiation. That's called ionizing radiation. Well, the non-ionizing radiation, which everyone had taken to be so benign, was bad for you. It was causing this disease. And the fact is that as soon as it was pointed out, they started a controversy, and there were those who said, well, no, they did other studies and they found no. And that's been one of the problems in the field, that there are ways of doing experiments that will give you the answer, the proper answer, and then there are other ways in which one can obscure the results of and one can hide them, and one can kind of get them mixed up so that you don't know what the answer is. For example, there was a study that was done on the effect of cell phones, in which the people who ran the study said, well, how do we know who's using a cell phone and who's not? Well, we'll take all those who register as of a certain date. They are cell phone users. And those who didn't register by that date are not cell phone users. Well, what about people who registered after that date and used a cell phone? And that's exactly what happened. And you found that the data were confused. So some of the people who were supposed to not be using the cell phones were using the cell phones, and since the data were intermixed, the results were valueless. So this is the kind of problem that we have in interpreting the data. But now there are an enormous number of studies, and the number of scientists who actually signed that petition to the UN is now well over 200. And that means that these are the leading researchers in this area, and they are publishing data which convince them that this is a very, very serious problem. Mm-hmm. The bad thing about it is that the problem is getting worse by the year because more and more people are using this non-ionizing radiation in their devices, and the atmosphere is getting so that people cannot live in an atmosphere that's free of this. And there are many people who are intolerant. They are unable to tolerate this level of radiation. And they are really beside themselves. There are very few places where they can actually find a comfortable place where they can live at what we would call a normal life.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, Dr. Blank, because I know this is the first time you and I have spoken, but you're talking to one of those people right now. I actually hit a brick wall with my Motorola Android 3G smartphone back in 2010, and my life has completely changed. I lost my 9-year healthcare career over it, and I've had to rewire my home. I can't go where there's Wi-Fi. Driving by a cell tower causes me pain. I have a severe trigeminal neuralgia in my face and jaw. And I'm like a walking RF detection meter. I mean, I don't even need to buy a meter because I am a meter. And watching your presentations on how our bodies are actual antennas was just so amazing to me. I actually purchased one of your presentations with Dr. Dever Davis back in October 2011 in Washington, D.C. It's called Evidence of Harm. And I know it's on YouTube, but I purchased a DVD, and I just watch it over and over and over because you and Dever Davis just put out so much incredible scientific data. It's just amazing. And I was wondering if you could talk to us about how our DNA is in fact fractal antennas, and we react to every frequency on the entire RF spectrum. It's just incredible. I think more people need to know about that.
Yeah, well, that's been our research at Columbia University. It's been primarily on the effects on DNA, because you say electromagnetic fields affect the body. Well, the body is a very complex system, and there are all kinds of chemical units in it. What is it that's actually happening? Well, the short answer is everything, because electromagnetic fields, electricity and magnetism are fundamental natural forces, and they interact with charges. And that means that if you've got electrons or protons, which are the basic building blocks of matter, then you've got, you interact, and you interact virtually all the time. So we are just, what should we say? We just, like in a laboratory, we're the chemicals that are around to be reacted with. We're the subject matter of, we're subject to these forces. And that means that all the chemicals in our body will react to these fields. And they do. But the thing is that the chemicals that turn out to be super important are the DNA. The different DNAs are the ones that carry the genetic information that we transmit from generation to generation. That's what I remember when I was in public school, that's what I was taught about DNA. That it carries, it's passed from parents to children, and that's how we're human. But the fact of the matter is that the DNA has much more to do with daily living, because the DNA has the code for all the proteins that we are using in our body. And when we need proteins, we activate the DNA, and that is we. There are systems in the body that activate the DNA, and the DNA starts to make new protein as needed. Now, the thing is that if you do anything with the code in the DNA, every time you activate it and then put it back into its normal, say, quiescent state, then it's reacting, and sometimes the reactions lead to errors, and sometimes you make, when it comes back, it doesn't come back the way it should come back. So the thing is, this is just part of normal living. But when you have these electromagnetic fields activating, they are doing other things that are causing damage. In fact, one of the earliest studies was done by scientists from the University of Washington, where they exposed DNA to these fields, and they found that the DNA would actually fragment. Little pieces came off it. The longer there was exposed, the bigger the volume of pieces, more and more pieces. So this was clear evidence of damage that occurs when you're exposed to the DNA. The work we did at Columbia was to actually take the interaction with DNA and find out So what are the fundamentals in terms of the reactions with the DNA? One of the things that we know that the body reacts to is that there are all kinds of problems, and there are early warning systems that cause responses. And the DNA is the source of one of these early warning systems. It is something that's called a cellular stress response. That is an activation of the DNA. Let me put this in the context of what are the the safety mechanisms that we have working for us. We know as a human body, if we need to react to some potential harm or some stress that's coming our way, we start to breathe faster. The body pumps the blood faster. These are the reactions of an organism. But the individual cells have their own protective mechanisms, and that's what we call the cellular stress response. And that means that when a cell is subjected to something bad, let's say a high temperature or an electromagnetic field or a acidity or a low oxygen, these things will trigger an interaction with DNA. And the DNA comes apart and starts to, or a section of it come apart and start to generate these special proteins. These are called stress proteins. And when you have stress proteins generated, that indicates that the body is, first of all, under stress, and secondly, that it's going to do something about it. And these help protect. They tend to move chemicals into cells which are having difficulty getting in, things like that. And the stress proteins, when you activate stress proteins, that's the body's signal that it's in trouble. And stress proteins are activated by the electromagnetic field starting from power lines. In other words, the lower frequencies activated, the radio frequencies, television level, microwave, cell phone, you keep going. These stress proteins are activated by different levels, and the levels are relatively low. I'd say relatively low. They are very low. So before you get any kind of response, let's say like the body would start to, the heart would start to pump faster in the whole body, these stress proteins are released at a very, very low level. So that if you're exposed to power lines, you can generate we measured the level at which the stress proteins are activated, and you found that they are the level which you can get when exposed to power lines, so maybe just a few milligauss above that. So it's an indication that the body's telling you. In other words, don't listen to the newspapers, don't listen to the scientists. Listen to your body. Your body's telling you the stuff is no good for you. It's causing harm, and it's mobilizing to combat that harm.
Right. I think part of the problem, though, is that people don't want to realize that and attribute it to something else. Oh, I'm just feeling stressed or nervous or overworked or tired. It's hard to equate DNA and have that conversation with the average person and really explain the emergency situation of all of this. So I think that's part of the problem here.
Well, it is a problem, but there are studies I think one can relate to that are scientific studies, but at least resonate in the public mind without too much sophistication. There was a study that was done in Iceland recently, where they measured the mutations. These are the changes that occur in the DNA as a result of exposure to these different harmful influences. And they measured the DNA, the mutations in children, I think there were about 80 of them, and their parents. So they measured the DNA in the parents, the father, the mother, and the child, and they had a record of these mutations that are present. And they found that the number of mutations that you have in children will correlate with the number of mutations that you have in the father. But they do not correlate with the number of mutations that you have in the mother. And this is an interesting point. why should there be a difference between the two parents? The answer lies in the fact that the male is making sperm cells, and when he reaches the age of maturity, he starts to make the sperm cells, and he makes them regularly. So new sperm cells are being made all the time by an adult male. Females, little girls are born with all their eggs. So the eggs are embedded in the ovary, and they stay there, protected by the ovarian tissue, and they don't start ripening until maturity. When the young girl reaches the age where the eggs are mature, they will be released one at a time, but the rest of them stay there, and they are protected. Relatively speaking, they are protected within the tissue of the ovary. So males going around are getting these sources of damage from exposure to the EMF that's in the environment, whereas females are relatively protected because of the way their reproductive materials are guarded within the ovaries, within the body. So when you look at that graph that relates the number of mutations that a child has, you find it correlates with the father, because the father's accumulating mutations, and they're getting, as they age and they're exposed to more and more of the environment, and more of these mutations are present. Now, these aren't a great number of mutations, but they're enough to measure, and they're enough to indicate that these are changes that are occurring steadily. And that's bad news, because that means that just by living, you're just getting exposed to all of the stuff that's around you.
Now, Dr. Blank, what about during the early stages of pregnancy, those ovarian follicles? According to Barry Trower, that's one of his main question that he asks governments when he goes and consults with them. He says, what is the safe amount of RF radiation to the ovarian follicles during the first 100 days of pregnancy? And the answer is none. There is no safe level, because they're very vulnerable during those early stages. So did that study take that into account, or are they just looking at fully matured females?
This was a different kind of study. What they found among the things among their conclusions was that there was a correlation between the number of mutations and autism. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, there were a couple of things that they found that correlated with it, and the autism was, it's a big problem these days, and it's growing, and nobody seems to know where it comes from. But the fact is that there was this correlation with the number of mutations in the father.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was the main purpose of that study. But the thing about you were asking about the effect of the DNA on the DNA, and the effect just build up, and you end up with this relation with between the number of damage that occurs to the DNA and the exposure to just the environment, the normal environment.
Yeah, it's sort of a long-term cumulative effect, isn't it?
Yeah, but you were asking about the fact that the children that were exposed in utero, let's say, or what are the effects that they have? There was an interesting study where someone was interested in the effect of exposure on birth weight, things like that. And what happened is they followed the mothers who were part of that study, and they found they followed the children. And one of the interesting things that came out of that study was the fact that the children who were exposed to the radiation in utero had a much higher rate of obesity, and also I forget which one it was, but there was something. It wasn't the schizophrenia, but or autism, but rather, it was some correlation, something related to autism that correlated with it.
Mm-hmm.
Had the consequences of early exposure, that is, exposure in utero, which didn't do anything, at least noticeably, shows up later on in the development of the child, that they're impaired, that they don't function as well, and it has these subtle effects, because it's not an effect on an organ, but it's an effect on a system.
Well, it's interesting. And in your Overpowered book, you talked about how not only did the DNA damage occur during exposure and even at very low exposures, like you're saying, in the ELF range, power line frequencies, but even after exposure, you said that the studies showed the damage continued even long after the exposure occurred. So this is a pretty serious environmental hazard when you look at it that way.
Yeah. Well, the damage occurs when you're exposed, but the fact is that the ramifications of the damage just continue.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, once you're not exposed, you're not going to get any more damage from the radiation. But on the other hand, whatever damage you have will enter the system and will affect anything it should be doing. It will make problems in that particular application. So it's one of the interesting things is the idea of the relation to childhood leukemia was picked up by a scientist who was looking at data for childhood leukemia, and he was following the data in different states, and he found that there was a peculiarity in the distribution of childhood leukemia with the age of the child, and there was a little bump in the numbers. The numbers actually increased when the child was sort of 3 or 4 years old. And that bump apparently wasn't present in all the samples he went through. He was going through pretty much every state, and he found that in the South there were places that didn't have this bump. And then he did further study, and he found that there was the bump appeared after, there was a couple of years after electrification came in. This was early in 1900s. So that the thing is that there was a correlation with the power, and that set people off and started them thinking that there was a relation between the exposure to these relatively weak fields and the incidence of childhood leukemia. And the man who did it was Sam Millam, and he's got a book out also. He's interested. He's interested in these kinds of problems, and he can pick up this stuff. He's the one who's talked a lot about dirty electricity. Mm-hmm. One of the big problems that we talk about supplying power at 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second, but the fact of the matter is that it's got a whole lot of other stuff online because of the way we make connections to the power line. Right. I mean, when you ground something in your home, you're doing things that are affecting the entire circuit. And when electricity goes in a circuit, and so whatever goes out from the powerhouse has to come back to the powerhouse. Well, it does come back to the powerhouse, but most of it apparently comes back through the ground and not through the wires that are set because of all the wiring problems. Mm-hmm. You have places out west where you have these large expanses of land where cattle are grazing, and I've seen pictures and papers where people see all the cows standing in the pasture, in the fields, in the same orientation. Mm-hmm. And they orient perpendicular to the line in which the current is flowing. Mm-hmm. That way, if they did the other way, if they were standing, in line with the current flowing, you get the current going up the hind legs and then down through the forelegs, and you get the current going through their bodies. Whereas if they stay at right angles to the direction of flow of current, then they're pretty much at the same potential, and they minimize the amount of current that's going through their bodies as a result of the ground current. But these are real effects. They're small, but they come as a consequence of our introduction of power, and they show up because they, as small as they are, these effects, they do affect the body, and the body reacts to it.
Right, and now with all the proliferation of smart meters, you've got all of this the radio frequencies in the air that now hop onto the power lines and are dragged into your homes, and so and the cell towers, there's really no escape.
That's the problem. There is no escape, and for most people, you're able to tolerate the level that we're at now. But there are, they say, about 5% of the population that cannot tolerate these levels, and they're in real trouble.
Right.
There are a few places that one can live in that are relatively isolated, and you can find some accommodation. But most of the, certainly the big cities, they're just full of the radiation of all kinds.
Yeah, and the people that can't tolerate it really should be considered the canaries in the coal mine. And the fact that our government is not taking heed of this warning it's really nothing more than criminal negligence, because this is just a giant scientific experiment to see how much these people can take. And you've been proving right along here with the scientific data that there's evidence of harm. It's been known for decades. People just generally don't feel the harm, so they're not conscious of it. They're not connecting the dots to the source of the problem. But then you have all the people with EHS, electromagnetic hypersensitivity, that openly feel it, and I'm one of them. And if you looked at me when I was being exposed, you would see it. My eyeballs twitch. I get puffiness right around my eyes, dark circles. I turn pale. You can literally see physical reactions just by looking at me. So I don't know why they aren't doing more studies on people. I mean, literally, there's no studies at all in America, to my knowledge. Isn't that right, Dr. Blank? There's no epidemiology studies of any sort going on in this country, unless you know of something I don't.
Yeah, well, at one time there was a lot of research going on now, but now the research it's not being funded. And the thing is that and what's worse is that the people who are doing this kind of research are not able to train people to continue it, so that the next generation of scientists is going to have relatively little preparation for going into this. I think the answer to your question is that this is not a new phenomenon. You've got we're well acquainted with tobacco. Mm-hmm. Tobacco, people went on and on and on, and it was bad. I mean, people were, they had a smoker's cough. Everyone knew that, and then the lung cancer came, and everybody was talking about it, and some people believed that it was correlated. And then you had the heads of I think, what was it, 7 or so big corporations were called down before Congress, and they all swore that there's no problem. And of course, they knew about these problems, and business has a very different set of standards, or moral standards too, because this isn't only business standards. Business should also not sell a harmful product. I mean, that's part of business ethics. The fact is that if you sell something that is potentially dangerous, you've got to warn people. And there are all kinds of shock warnings on electrical equipment, but nobody warns about exposure to this kind of radiation and the consequences of that exposure. So it's our society and its values. We don't have the value that you're talking about that's missing, the ability to care, the importance of caring for your neighbor's welfare, for your own welfare too. I don't know. It's a moral question as well as a practical scientific.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is making me think about the sticker labels in Berkeley, California on the cell phones, and now how the CTIA has come across, and they're suing Berkeley to say that they're violating their First Amendment rights. I mean, you talk about business, that's what that's all about.
Yep.
Well, we've had a very momentous occasion with the passing of the vice president's son, Beau Biden, and he had a meningioma or a glioblastoma meningioform. It was right behind his right ear, right where he held his phone, and there's virtually been no press at all covering the connection from his brain tumor to his cell phone use. And it's just shocking to me that the media is not even covering this, bringing this to the public's attention. What do you know about this, Dr. Blank?
I know what you know, that there's an absence of coverage. That on the internet, you've got Ellie Marks, who lives in Berkeley, has been. She immediately published something on this, saying that not a factual thing, but sort of, my God, look at this, the correlation, and it's probably this. And I think that she's probably right, because most of these are relatively rare things, especially in a young person. And the thing is that almost, I would say it's almost obvious that someone like that was very active with in business and using the phone, all the politics, and it's very likely that he just kept on using it, and they didn't think much.
Boy, Dr. Blank, you really wrote a masterpiece. Kudos to you with your overpowered book. I mean, you just covered all the bases. You compiled all the most important data. And I like that you seem to have a knack for sifting through the extraneous information, and you know how to kind of focus in on the things that will make an impact and possibly have effect as far as future legislation. And you really put all the important data together in one book. And I'd like to bring everyone's attention to your acknowledgement section, where you acknowledged Paul Brodeur, and you gave him credit for being one of the great science reporters of our time, and you talked about his 3-part series in the New Yorker magazine, 1989, and he was one of the first to publicize EMR issues. And after reading that, I decided to go online, and I looked up a bunch of Paul Brodeur's books, and I ordered them, and one of them that blew my socks off, Dr. Blank, was The Zapping of America, Microwaves, Their Deadly Risk and Their Cover-Up, published in 1977. And I'm going to read what it says right on the front cover. It says, microwave radiation can blind you, alter your behavior, cause genetic damage, even kill you. The risks have been hidden from you by the Pentagon, the State Department, and the electronics industry. With this book, the microwave cover-up is ended. And that was in 1977. And there are 2 full chapters in that book talking about the Moscow embassy and how the embassy staff was exposed to microwave radiation frequencies for over 20 years by the Russians and possibly even by the CIA. But our government was studying the effects for over 20 years on their own staff without the staff knowing it. And they were doing buccal swabs, swabbing their cheeks, and doing chromosomal tests and blood tests. And they were learning the effects of microwave radiation for I believe it was from 1952 or 53 through 1976. Now, what blew my mind, Dr. Blank, was Paul Brodeur explained in great detail how the Associated Press, for a full year, covered this story from about 1976 to 1977. It was in all the newspapers across America for a full year. And I believe even President Ford had to acknowledge it during a press conference. He was actually put on the spot by the press, and it was the only time that a president had to acknowledge the microwave radiation. And it was a big topic for a year, in 76 to 77, and Americans were concerned. And the embassy staff was so concerned they actually brought lawsuits, and they were up in arms. And then awareness spread in America that, wait, if this was bad, then maybe it's not good to live near a radar site. And then you had Americans protesting about being exposed to radar sites. So this is a point in history that's very important, and it shows that when Americans are informed of the facts, they become really concerned about it. And they actually did do something about it, but it appears that after 1977, something happened. The media just stopped covering it. Do you know anything about how they kind of squashed this awareness that happened at that time?
Well, business is very effective in what it undertakes, and the fact is, with government collusion, it's much easier. I don't know. I don't have to explain it, but I don't know the explanation. But the fact is that they have techniques that they use, and they also have money. And money is a great lubricant, and catalyst. It will get things to move and in directions that you may not expect. So there are all kinds of reasons why things go wrong, and usually it's in the U.S. it's been a question of somebody in business being able to make money by having certain regulations.
Mm-hmm. Weren't the frequencies used during the Moscow Embassy event pretty much the same as what we're getting from cell towers and smart meters?
I don't know. I don't have that information. I don't even know if they published that. I'm not sure. But the fact is that the microwave technology was available, and the thing is that this was all a development of research on radar during the war. And that was a very important development in terms of helping us to win that war. I mean, without radar, I think the Brits would have succumbed in the Battle of Britain with the air raids that were coming over. At least they stood some chance. Although there were open targets, but basically they had some kind of warning. And the fact is that it just was an important development. And obviously the research went on. I mean, the atomic bomb was something that brought an end to, a quicker end to the war, and science has paid off. The scientific research paid off very handsomely in that way. And the scientific research does pay off. There's a big payoff when you get, let's say, a cure to a disease. But then afterwards it becomes yesterday's news, and people aren't as interested, and people don't care as much. And when stories break about the dangers of electromagnetic radiation, they have their run. They'll be around, let's say, in the headlines for 1 or 2 days, and then that's it. It's yesterday's news. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with kind of human frailty that helps this stuff propagate. Right. And the other thing is that there are people who are making money as a result of this. And if you
lots of it.
If you have, if it costs a little bit to put in something that will minimize the exposure, companies often don't do that. You wonder about some of the things that even in homes, for example, when you're dealing with something simple like plumbing, there may be a simple part that could be put in something that's a little more durable, and yet that little part will go in there because it's cheaper. They get it, and they just what the hell, they'll do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the stuff that fails. You can get a whole system failing, or all for the want of a nail. That kind of thing. It's it's part of the business ethic that is not nearly as developed as it should be. To have a society that's really caring, or not necessarily caring. That's a wrong term. That is honest, and that does the best it can. So it's hard to people do what they have to get away with it. Right. With as little as they can. It's like kids cheating on homework.
Let's get back to your appeal for a moment. So what is the status of that? What has happened since this has broken into the news? I think that was in May 15th, something like that. What's been the fallout from that?
Well, we've gotten, I say we, the people who circulated and gotten a lot of good press. They have not gotten a reply from the UN, at least as of yesterday. I haven't consulted, I haven't looked at today yet to see. But we were kind of hoping that there would be some kind of reaction, or at least a recognition, acknowledgement, whatever you want to call it. We haven't heard anything yet. But there are all kinds of, people are coming in, they want to sign, scientists are becoming aware of this, and we have over 200 scientists. These are scientists who have published in this area. I mean, there are a lot of scientists in the world, but there are relatively few who have worked on electromagnetic fields, and these are the ones. If you've published in that area, you can sign this, and your signature will carry some weight. And so we have over 200 now who have signed it. And and I think there are nations, the odd nations have added to the number of, I don't know, I'm not sure we've got every last nation in the world on there. In fact, I'm sure we don't, because there are lots of small ones around. But it's gotten a fair amount of good press, and there have been presentations at various scientific meetings so that other parts of the scientific community are being informed of the details of the appeal. And I think everybody, who's tuned in at all to what's going on in the world is aware that this is a tremendous force. And now that we know that it has these biological effects, that we ought to do something about it. There ought to be better control than just letting things go, without any regulation at all.
Right, so I'd like to have a bit of a call to action here. What would you say to listeners? Not everyone's a scientist and can contribute to this, but just the everyday person that's hearing this interview today, what should they do when this interview is over to make a positive change?
Well, I think that in a practical way, I always tell people that there are simple things that you can do that will minimize your exposure. One, most people have Wi-Fi. You can generally have your Wi-Fi set up so that you can shut it off at night or shut it off when you're not using it. Most people keep it on all the time because it's just simpler that way. You have it on, if you need it, you go there and it's there. It takes a little effort and a little thought to shut your Wi-Fi off and then put it on when you want it. And not when you want it, when you need it. So that's the first thing that I tell people, and that's relatively easy to do. You just have to remember that it's like brushing your teeth. You go and brush your teeth, you turn off the Wi-Fi, and go to sleep. So the other thing I tell people is to shut off your cell phone. That's an easy thing to do. You don't have to have it on, because when it's on, your cell phone is telling the tower where you are, so it can send you a message. So there's a back and forth between you and the tower. And every time it sends a message to the tower, that message is going through you. So shut off your cell phone. When you think that you may want to know if you've gotten a call, just take out your cell phone, turn it on and check, and then turn it off again if you've got no call. And if you've got a call, follow it up. So those, I think, are two very important ways in which one can just minimize the kind of exposure that they have. Other than that, you know what your devices are. You can stay away from them and not use them as often. And also, there are things that you should be careful about. Many devices, this is on a different level. For example, devices that one has for children. Many of these electrical things are, especially take preemies in the hospitals, they're cribs or bassinets or these places where they are spending all of their time basically, are wired so that everybody can get all the data they need, heart rate, and, breathing rates, and temperature, and so on. And all that electronic stuff is generating an electromagnetic haze there. And the fields in that place are generally much higher. They're far too high. I've seen some data where they actually have something in the order of 10 to 12 milligauss in these devices. And the thing is that the regulations that were put into force in connection with power lines, 3 to 4 milligauss was the level at which they said it became dangerous. So if you're up to 10, 12 milligauss, it's really, and you're exposing these frail young organisms that their systems are pretty compromised to start with. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that kind of apparatus. So that's something that people should certainly think more than twice about, and certainly avoid. So these are the kinds of things I think that one should, be aware of. Otherwise, you know what kinds of devices you have. Just minimize the contact, or minimize the distance, maximize the distance between you and these devices.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. I think people need to take heed and check their environment out and speak up in situations like that. You're in the hospital with a tiny little one. Speak up and say, I don't want my child in there. Or I was at a hospice visiting someone the other day and brought my meters and thought, there's no way these people, I know they're dying in hospice, but my gosh, the levels were just extreme because of the Wi-Fi that was in the building. So none of these healthcare facilities are places to heal anymore.
Just went through that with my grandmother who passed, and in her hospice environment, she was being exposed to 1 volt per meter constant Wi-Fi while she's in hospice. I could barely visit my own grandmother. I mean, I had to limit myself because it was so just miserable for me to be in that environment. And you could see the effects on her. Her memory was shot. She was just scramble-brained and didn't know what was going on. And that's how I feel. And I'm a healthy 40-year-old, so it's just it's terrible what they're doing in the healthcare environment.
Yeah, not to mention the quality of care because of the staff and the
you see
providers.
Those effects on the staff too. Yeah, they're all scrambled and no memory, and they don't even know what they just did. It's scary.
Well, in wrapping up, where can folks go to learn more about you and what you do, and any websites or places that we can send folks?
Well, I guess you mentioned my book, Overpowered. I think that's a pretty good introduction, and it's written in a sort of user-friendly way. So I think many people will find that approachable, and it'll give you not only the practical, but it largely gives you the background and the history and the many dimensions of this problem.
Okay.
And sometimes you may be able to help, on something that we hadn't thought about. And you may be able to do something on a local level, and that's frequently the area in which one is most effective. You can do it on a personal level and on a local level. On a national level or a statewide level, it's much more difficult to be effective, and yet that's the level at which big changes will eventually have to come.
Yeah, I think it should be mandatory reading that every member in Congress should have to read your book.
Well, I think we need to employ the precautionary principle here and take heed and some of the advice that you gave and pay attention to this now before it's too late.
Yeah, and everybody out there, please get Dr. Blank's book, Overpowered, and share it around. And thank you so much, Dr. Blank, and God bless you for all that you've done.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with our listeners. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, thank you for joining us on Boil the Frog Slowly Radio. Please come back next week, and for more information, go to the website boilthefrogradio.com. And until next week, remember to practice safe phone.
Boil the frog slowly, you're a frog in a pot. Turn out the heat and things will get hot. Will you jump out or will you burn? Listen to the show and you will return to